Welcome to the Daily AI News Digest. This broadcast is sponsored by bestai.org. Today is June 30th, 2026. Look, over the next few minutes, we're going to strip away the marketing noise and look at today's objective market realities. We are currently tracking a massive structural transition across the sector. We're moving away from theoretical capabilities directly into hard infrastructure deployment. So let's analyze the capital expenditures, the legislative shifts, and the actual technical models that are reshaping the global economy today. On today's rundown, we'll be examining major sovereign capital initiatives over in East Asia, the ongoing transition toward agentic AI architectures, rapidly evolving compliance frameworks for federal contractors, and finally, the widening enterprise deployment gap. Let's dive right into the data.
Starting with our biggest moves today, specifically looking at sovereign capital and public equity.
We're tracking an unprecedented convergence right now of geopolitical, infrastructure funding, and public equity taxation proposals. Over in South Korea, they've just finalized a massive $1.2 trillion semiconductor and AI infrastructure investment plan. Now, this isn't just a simple expansion of what they already have. The strategic intent here is to completely decentralize their technology assets away from the Seoul metropolitan area, basically to alleviate power grid congestion and secure long-term physical computing dominance.
And you can really see the scale of the current arms race in the region. South Korea's plan is going to anchor 4 memory fabrication plants in the southwest, leaning heavily on Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix. But at the exact same time, Japan is mirroring this move. Led by the cabinet of Sanai Takaichi, Japan is mobilizing a $2.3 trillion economic strategy. Their allocation is strictly focused on stabilizing regional hardware supply chains and actually integrating artificial intelligence directly into their defense industrial base.
Now, shifting gears to U.S. domestic policy, we're seeing a totally different approach to capital. U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders has proposed a mechanism to create a $7 trillion sovereign wealth fund. And the kicker? It would be financed directly by the artificial intelligence sector. So we're looking at a very significant proposed intervention in how AI infrastructure is actually owned and capitalized.
The mechanics of this proposal are distinct from standard corporate taxation. The Sanders bill would essentially establish a one-time 50% equity transfer for any AI company exceeding $200 million in sales. So rather than draining operational cash, it transfers voting stock. This effectively shifts public involvement from passive tax collection to direct corporate governance, overseen by a 7-person independent commission. And it's worth noting, the idea of a public stake in frontier AI developers isn't just fringe politics anymore. It's being actively discussed across the political and corporate spectrum right now.
Moving on to product and model realities, and specifically the shift to agentic architecture.
What our analysis of the June 2026 rollouts indicates is that AI is increasingly functioning as foundational autonomous architecture, rather than just an extra software layer you slap on top of things. The big platforms are internalizing these capabilities. Microsoft, for instance, has strategically reduced its third-party dependency by launching its own in-house AMI model family, trained entirely from scratch. Over at Apple, they've executed a massive architectural rebuild of Siri using Google Gemini to allow for continuous cross-device execution. And Google has altered its core search infrastructure to deploy 24/7 autonomous agents that basically monitor and act on specific web topics without you ever needing to prompt them. For enterprise IT leaders, this is a clear signal. You need to prepare legacy systems for persistent agentic integration right now.
Let's look at the open source landscape, because it really builds on these shifting dynamics. This clinical comparison illustrates that Zipu AI's open-source GLM 5.2 is currently outperforming established proprietary models, like GPT-5.5, on the SWE Bench Pro software engineering benchmark. We're talking a score of 62.1 against GPT 5.5's 58.6. And GLM 5.2 achieves this at a significantly lower operational cost, all under an unrestricted MIT license. So that capability gap between highly expensive closed systems and free open weights, it's narrowing incredibly fast.
Turning now to regulation and business signals, focusing on compliance in what has become a highly fragmented landscape.
Enterprise deployment is facing some real institutional hurdles right now. You can see the tension between open commercial release schedules and national security. Case in point, OpenAI has voluntarily restricted the public launch of its GPT-5.6 family. At the request of the Trump administration, they've actually submitted to a customer-by-customer federal vetting process. This essentially establishes a de facto national security review for frontier models. It shows the federal government is using bilateral voluntary compliance to manage dual-use software outside of formal legislation.
And if we look at the hard compliance timeline, the action items for multinational enterprises are immediate. Public comments for the U.S. General Services Administration's strict new data rules are due this August. Over in Europe, the EU's direct ban on intimate deepfake generating tools will be fully enforced by December. And then looking to January 2027, Colorado's targeted law governing automated decision-making is going to land. So the runway to get compliant is very short.
For federal contractors specifically, the proposed GSA rule means you need to be auditing your systems today. The mandates are incredibly exacting. Vendors must implement automated eyes-off data handling, meaning human review of government inputs and outputs is entirely restricted. Plus, developers have to provide immediate 7-day notifications if a model updates subtly degrades safety guardrails or increases bias metrics. And finally, the controlling entity operating the large language model has to fall strictly under U.S. jurisdiction.
Okay, let's get into the analyst's take. We need to quantify what we're calling the enterprise deployment gap.
When you strip away the hype, here is the cold business reality of the AI landscape. There is a massive, widening gap between what these models can technically do and what enterprises are actually ready for. According to the latest Accenture AI Progress Barometer, the baseline metrics are still remarkably low. North America leads with a readiness score of just 48.9 out of 100, and Europe sits at 43.1. The truth is, only a tiny fraction of global C-suite leaders are achieving any sort of sustained, scalable integration of these tools. And because businesses are struggling to adopt the tech on their own, the foundation model providers are being forced to pivot.
To bridge this critical deployment gap, the major players are initiating a multi-billion-dollar capital shift. They're realizing they can't just sell software licenses, they have to function almost like enterprise services firms. Google Cloud has set up a $750 million partner fund. OpenAI is committing over $4 billion to build a network of forward-deployed engineers, literally embedding their own technical staff directly into their clients' workflows. And Anthropic has launched a joint venture with Blackstone just to service mid-market companies. The overarching goal here is to physically construct custom applications for clients who just don't have the internal capacity to do it themselves.
Wrapping up with our Market Watch and outro, here are the catalysts for the week ahead. As we push into Q3, analysts are going to be closely monitoring whether developers like Meta and xAI actually comply with this federal push for voluntary model reviews before they launch. We're also waiting on the finalization of those GSA data flowdown rules, which will completely dictate how global vendors sell to the U.S. government. Also, keep an eye on the ongoing structural showdown between the DOJ's federal preemption efforts and the aggressive AI legislation popping up at the state level. And finally, enterprise IT departments are scrambling right now to mitigate agent jacking. It's a newly disclosed security threat targeting autonomous developer tools that could directly hit corporate bottom lines. All of this brings us to the critical macroeconomic question underlying today's data. As capital expenditures absolutely soar into the trillions, we really have to ask, will these multi-billion-dollar deployments actually translate into measurable operational returns for the enterprise? Or are we building toward a structural financial correction before the technology can fundamentally alter the bottom line?
Ultimately, the market is going to decide. That concludes our explainer on today's objective market realities. Thank you so much for joining us. Please be sure to visit our sponsor, bestai.org, for more daily analysis. We'll see you next time.